When you build a company and you don't establish systems or processes, it's basically just a group of people doing a bunch of tasks. And that's really hard to scale. you know? And I know because that's what I was building in the early, age of my business.
Hey everyone, welcome to Lone Startup. I'm Pat Kaloran, and I'm here to shine a light on Austin's most impressive entrepreneurs. From locally owned small businesses to global brands, Austin has an endless supply of inspiration. We sometimes just have to slow our scroll, take a breath, and listen. Let's dive in. Some people's resumes make you sit back and wonder, what have you been doing with your time? Jay B Sauceda is one of those guys. When I first came across him, I knew he had built and sold Sauceda Industries, a third-party logistics company. But what I didn't realize at the time is that it started out of necessity to fulfill orders for his t-shirt brand, Texas Humor. Then there's the fact that he's a pilot. At one point, he flew a single-engine Cessna across Texas with a camera out the window, capturing the state's wildly diverse landscapes from above. And he published the book, A Mile Above Texas. His love for Texas and its culture runs deep, and now he's bringing that passion to his newest role as the host of Texas Country Reporter, traveling the back roads and telling the stories of ordinary Texans doing extraordinary things. On top of all this, he's using his experiences as a business builder and leader to be an incredible implementer of EOS, the Entrepreneurial Operating System, a framework that helps companies run their businesses with more focus and overall enjoyment. Not bad for a guy who flunked out of UT, something he credits as a key moment in figuring out what he was actually meant to do.
But my senior year in particular, I had started, my junior year actually, I had started a lot of internships. And I like work. It's not like I was lazy. It wasn't that I was only partying and sitting on the couch playing video games.
Yeah.
I did a little bit of that, but I was actually working quite a bit. I worked on a documentary that did really well and got screened and premiered at South by Southwest. That happened in 2005 and with a pretty well-known photographer here in town named Andrew Shapter. That blew up. I was on the road filming for that movie. I was the only production assistant. We went and interviewed Erykah Badu and Dave Matthews Band and Eric Clapton, all these big names. And so I was really busy with that. And I was getting a lot of real world experience, but I was not going to class. And for me, I just directly was seeing way more value out of those internships than I was like being in class, finishing up a government degree.
Yeah.
And so my hope was, and this was me being kind of young and dumb, but like my hope was, I'll carve out enough time to get the work done. And I just never really did. And so, of course, I flunked out. And most people think that I stayed and became a photographer because that's what I wanted to be when I grew up. But it was really, I flunked out and I wanted to stay in Austin so I could go back and finish my degree. And photography and freelancing was the way in which I did that. And that ended up just blowing up. You know? So,
wow. Was that a pretty big grind, I assume? Like just kind of trying to figure out how to freelance without
not totally in that, I had done freelance work for a couple of years in college. It was all Mickey Mouse stuff. It wasn't like anyone was giving me these huge budgets, but there were a few photographers that I met. Adam Voorhees, who I met through actually Marty and Adam Butler. Adam Voorhees came and brought his portfolio by the studio when he had first moved back to Austin. And I met him, and then I just started to become friends with him. And over time, I just kind of followed him around and learned how he was, going to market as a photographer. And I met other guys like Matt Rainwaters and Casey Dunn, and all of them had worked on the coastal sides of the country where photography kind of has a pretty strong foothold from a big commercial perspective.
Yeah.
And I just learned how they were doing things and slowly picked up on it and built my book of business around that. But
nice.
Yeah.
And so when did the Texas Humor kind of start up? I know you created a Twitter account in 2011, right?
Yeah, that was much later. I mean, I started out as a photographer freelancing in college in 2005.
Yeah.
And then I left UT in 2007, and then I basically freelanced, henceforth. The Texas Humor and the Twitter account started in 2011. On the kind of tail end of that career.
Yeah, and that was just kind of like using your creative passion for Texas. That was just kind of an output of like coming up with things.
Yeah, it was really just something to do on the side. I figured I could maybe make some mailbox money, and I was trying to solve for one of the challenges of being a freelancer is that you're only making money when you're working, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so the two problems were that were, one, it's almost impossible to create leverage on yourself outside of maybe stock photography,
Mm-hmm.
and secondly, and photography is a young person's game. Eventually, you get kind of tired of being on the road and out physically setting up and breaking down these shoots. And
Yeah.
the type of photography I was doing wasn't your average like wedding photo stuff. Like we were
Right.
shooting huge 50, 60, $100,000 budgets for these big advertising agencies. And
Yeah.
so those are a slog. I mean, number one, it's for sure a slog trying to win that work.
Mm-hmm.
And number two, it's physically very demanding, and so
Right.
I kind of had been trying to think through, okay, what is this going to look like in my 30s, 40s, 50s?
Mm-hmm.
And I want to settle down, start having kids, et cetera. And Texas Humor was just kind of like a fun way to throw a
Yeah.
little bit of mailbox money into what I was doing.
Yeah. Because that era I know well. I had actually moved to Austin. I guess it was like 2012, 2013, so maybe a couple years after you'd started Texas Humor. But I worked at the Chive, which is a lot of funny T-shirts, right? And
Hmm.
that was a heyday of, I feel like, when Twitter was obviously really just starting to kind of get some traction, and people accounts were starting to get some followings. And then the funny T-shirt things was also kind of exploding at that
Yeah.
during that point. It's like you almost had this perfect window of being able to hit
Oh, we were
Twitter
printing money. I mean, it
and the
was,
T-shirts, right? It
yeah.
was this kind of perfect combination that you did.
And yeah, it was pretty fascinating to me how quickly it caught on. I mean, the
Hmm.
audience took a while to build, right? I mean, I started in 2011. We probably didn't hit 100,000 followers for a few months, which I say that as though that took a long time. But compared to the type of growth that we were seeing kind of in 2012 and 2013, when
Hmm.
Twitter was really hitting a zeitgeist and stuff. The early years, I mean, it was a lot of like bad content trying to just
Yeah.
figure out what sticks. And then
Yeah.
eventually we hit this like stride, and then it was just off to the races. So there have been some
Yeah.
other late entrants into the same space with like in the like kind of Texas specific stuff, but no one's
Yeah.
really ever gotten as big as our account did because we just got big before everybody else could. And
Yeah.
so we were at 500,000 followers really on all the platforms. Pretty early on,
Hmm.
and around that time was kind of when people became a little bit more selective about who they're following, what they're following, right? And
Hmm.
so you can
Right.
get big, but it's not as easy as it was when we built the account.
Yeah. And I'm curious, during that early period where you got a ton of fun, big traction, you were selling all these T-shirts, like how, and I know eventually you would obviously, create your own company, Sauceda Industries, logistics company, to solve this, but how were you doing like fulfillment and shipping those shirts back then? Were you using another company to do all that, or
No, I
what did that
tried to
look like?
hire a company here in town, and they had a really bad sales guy. I mean, their CEO talks about that a lot now. That this is kind of the problem with bad employees, is that like that guy was rude to me about not wanting my business, and it pissed me off. And one of the like comments he made was like, "Call me in 6 months when your account's big enough for us to service." And I said it much more nicely than the way that he did, but ultimately it pissed me off, and I wrote him back and I said, "In 6 months, I'll know how to do this. Like, I don't like. Why would I need?"
Yeah.
The whole point of trying to hire y'all is that I don't want to have to figure this problem out, and it
Right.
will take away. It's an opportunity cost to me growing my business.
Yeah.
And when he said that, I was just like, you know what, I'm going to go do this. And
Wait, so he said it because you were too small potatoes at the time,
yeah,
or for
so what happened was I went to him, I went to this company and I said, "Hey, look, like I share t-shirt vendors with another account that I know is one of your clients who is doing great business. And here are all the metrics to show that when I launch my store in a week, 2 weeks, whatever,
Hmm.
I will probably have a lot of sales. And here are the reasons why."
Hmm.
I laid out the math. I said, I've got this size audience. They have that size audience. I have this size audience. Here are all the similarities between what they're doing and what I'm doing. And I understand why you don't take on clients with no previous volume.
Hmm.
I'm coming to you with 2 shirts. I'll bring them. We can drop them off, set up the integration. Like, I know how this works.
Hmm.
And I just don't want to have to handle the fulfillment. And the guy wasn't encouraging. There wasn't like oh, great business. I'd love to look at this and see, maybe there's a way to do it. Can you maybe just get like a week's worth of sales and then, call me or
Hmm.
whatever? There was none of that. The guy basically, said to the effect of like, "Oh, cute little business you have. This is not worth my time." and call me in 6 months when you've got enough business for us to actually do something for you.
Great relationship builder, this guy.
Yeah, and it was just like it was just not at all like helpful,
Yeah.
and I didn't expect him to like roll out the red carpet for me, but I would just assume that you could see the forest through the trees. It's not like I had like a Twitter account with 15 people at this point. I mean, we have
Right.
300,000 or 400,000 followers, and
Yeah.
there was a ton of stuff to show. And not to mention, it's not like I'd also not sold anything. I took him the data from a print-on-demand website that I'd been using that just had bad quality t-shirts, but I could show him like, look, I sold like 800 shirts through this platform over here. I'm making less money and the quality's lower. If I actually had like my Shopify store going, which will be much nicer, and my photography and all that, this will be 1,000 times better. We probably sell 4 or 5 times as many as we've already sold.
Yeah.
And so I wasn't starting from scratch.
Right.
I just didn't have anything yet sold through this new website that I was building.
Yeah.
And he just didn't want to have it. And so anyway, it pissed me off enough that I was like, all right, we'll just do it ourselves. So we did it out of a garage, and we did that for about 2.5 months. And then we moved it to my office in downtown Houston. And then eventually we got a warehouse. And
so that was the birth of Sauceda Industries, more or less?
Like that was the birth of our fulfillment kind of like learnings.
Yeah.
We got the warehouse in 2014, August of 2014. And then I wouldn't say we really did fulfillment for anybody as like a business until mid to late 2015.
Okay.
We did it for about a year for ourselves only.
Yeah.
I had 1 or 2 buddies who had super small e-commerce stores that I helped with. We shipped maybe a few items here. And that's ultimately what kind of opened my eyes to it. But the thing that really, tipped us over into we should offer this was that I had a couple of small companies kind of reach out and say, hey, I see you're doing this for your own store. Would you maybe do it for me? And I did the math. I was like, oh, this can make sense. And then there was another 3PL here in town that was called Fulfillery that these 2 great gals were running, and they had started the business. And I think they kind of fell out of love with what they were doing with it. And I just happened to meet one of them at a party I was at. One of them kind of shared some challenges that they were having with their business. And I said, hey, why don't you just come look at how we're doing things? And she was like, you don't feel like that's competitive or whatever? And I was like, look, my sense of this business is that it's probably relationship driven. You and I both can put shit in a cardboard box and send it out the door. People are either going to hire you or they're going to hire me based off of personality and the way that our companies are ran. So like, I can teach you what we're doing in the warehouse. That's not going to be skin off my back. And so she came and did and saw how we were running stuff. And then ultimately, I don't know, maybe 6 or 9 months later, she called me and she said, hey, we decided to get out of this business, but I have like 5 or 6 clients that are either working with me or about to onboard. And I want to find a great landing spot for them. And I think that y'all's facility may be it.
Oh, wow.
And they came on board. One in particular, a company called Branch Basics that was based here. And it was a cleaning solution product. And they came on board with us. And I mean, like overnight, we had like 300 shipments a day coming in from them.
Wow.
And we had to hire a couple people. And
yeah.
So it was pretty crazy. But that really like kind of tipped the scales for us. And it suddenly in late 2015 became, all right, we're now a legitimate business, and we have to do something around this. And I think Haller Brothers onboarded with us, in 2016 is when they onboarded.
Yeah.
And then it just kind of went from there.
That's wild, man. So it started out fulfilling your own need, and maybe not. That guy saying no to you was probably the best thing, right? Because you had to figure out how to do it on your own, and then kind of the same way you were trying to look for leverage to create the t-shirt business on the side of your freelancing thing, you wanted to figure out how you could maybe potentially leverage this other kind of initiative you took up, which was kind of doing your own logistics. And
I mean, to me, I back then knew that the like, sort of gimmicky t-shirt thing had a shelf life. I mean, it was real simple. I'd go in my closet and you got 17 shirts with sayings on them.
Yeah.
And there were going to be 2 major issues that would play out over time. The first of which is, how many of these do you actually need? And the answer is like, not that many.
Yeah.
The novelty of wearing the same shirt. It's like, it's fun wearing it the first time around, and they're like, oh man, that's really clever. And then eventually that shirt's really prevalent, or they've seen you wear it enough times that it's kind of like, okay.
Yeah.
And then the second
Then are
problem,
you the funny t-shirt guy
yeah,
moving forward?
well, and that's kind of the second problem issue, is that like eventually the people who wear funny t-shirts move on because they grow up and they don't wear that stuff all the time,
Yeah.
right? Like you
Yeah.
move into a different type of clothing.
Yeah.
You're maybe not working in the type of job that you were at that age, and you've got to wear more professional stuff, whatever.
Yep.
So, I knew that we needed to evolve the product offering of Texas Humor more broadly, but I also understood very distinctly that just this era of those types of shirts, like it would play out. And so
Mhm.
for me, although the building of Sauceda Industries was totally just kind of like we stumbled upon it out of solving our own problem, with
Mhm.
time, it was clear to me that like any amount of energy and time that I poured into that specifically was probably going to provide more long-term enterprise value to me and my family
Yeah.
than trying to just kind of build up this like meme account. And
Right.
that's totally what's played out. I mean,
Yeah.
it's 100% true.
Well, hey, there's long-term thinking. There's the ADD is it seems like you had some
Well,
longer-term thinking process back then.
it's counterintuitive, but I think that the ADD kind of wiring does a really good job of helping you fractal through all the potential possibilities. And that's always been
Kind of
true.
rapid fire
Right.
ideas and different paths you can take. And
Yeah, but it's so like I can think from 1 to 100 in a big way, right? And
Mhm.
so um I'm an EOS implementer now,
Yeah.
and EOS parlance, like I am very firmly a visionary. Like I can see the future. I can help, organizations and teams see around the corner. I struggle on my own to think about what does that mean for today? Like where do we start?
Mm,
And so I always, we eventually implemented EOS at our company, and that's what this whole thing is about: is giving
yeah.
you tools for how to take these really big abstract ideas and distill them down to what does it mean today.
Right.
And so yes, I had the foresight to think like this is probably something we should work on, but they didn't make me great at like building that company.
Yeah.
Like the first 2 or 3 years were really harrowing in a lot of ways because I was not the type of manager that was super process oriented, and
Mhm.
I knew that that's where we needed to go, but how to translate that into something that was like an effective plan for both the long term and short term was hard.
Yeah.
And so that was now in retrospect, it's my like I use a lot of frameworks and things like that to help manage
Mhm.
the things that are a challenge about the way that I'm wired.
Yeah.
But those are variables that I know. Those are known knowns.
Yeah.
And as a result, I can kind of build around those strengths and weaknesses. In the way that there are really process driven people who are fantastic at building plans that have no ability to see the future, right? Like
Mhm.
that's the opposite, right? Like in EOS parlance, we call that the integrator. It's
Yeah.
not that they can't be visionary people, but those people tend to be better at kind of keeping the trains running on time and tying
Yep.
systems together and getting teams working in conjunction. That's just not the type of work that I get a lot of value out of.
Yeah.
I enjoy vision building and partnerships and long-term strategy and things like that. And I
Mhm.
like partnering with people who really like getting in the weeds and spending a lot of time on the tenacity of a business, right? And
Yeah.
so that's something that I learned later on in life that now in retrospect, when I think about school and a lot of these other things in my life, I've realized like it's really hard for me on my own to go do those things. I
Yep.
have to use systems and processes to help manage that energy, right?
Totally.
So
At what point did you realize, or how did EOS even come into your company? Like, did you seek that out, or somebody say, "Hey, you guys should check out this EOS stuff. Like, this might help you with some implementation." Like,
it
how did
was
that
it was
come
kind
about?
of honestly it was by accident. What was not by accident was I joined EO, which is entrepreneurs
Hmm.
organization. One of my clients, Stephanie Fox, had a business called Bravelets, and that she was building and was going through some challenges at the time. And we were having this really great conversation. She came over to my warehouse, and it was like after hours, and we were just sitting there chatting about like she was dealing with, and we were commiserating over how lonely it can be as a leader of an organization and the challenges that you'll face very much alone. You're oftentimes aware of really good and bad things ahead of and before everybody else at your business, and you
Hmm.
can't share that with them. You're aware of just a lot of stuff that you just can't really commiserate. And so we were having this great conversation. She was like, given where this discussion's gone, like, I bet you would get a lot of value out of having a peer group. I'm in one. It's called
Mm,
EO. I'm in a forum within EO that is, this number of CEOs that are all they're all these entrepreneurial people,
yeah.
and they meet monthly, and so she gave me the whole rundown. So I ended up applying, and I got in. And then I joined a forum that was made up of basically, 7 other leaders who were all at various stages of growth, but similar in nature to me, around $1 million to $2 million in revenue, 1 or 2 years in business, et cetera.
Yeah.
And it was through there that, the guy who wrote the book and basically created EOS, this guy, Gino Wickman, was the co-founder of the Detroit chapter of EO. And so EOS and EO are not related, but EOS is very widely adopted within the EO kind of world of entrepreneurship.
I was wondering how those were related.
Yeah, they're not. I mean, they're only related in that Gino was a member of the EO chapter, but there's no like actual physical connection between the two.
Okay.
But that said, like it's so widely adopted within the EO kind of world that it came up in my forum, and I was growing. I was hitting some ceilings with building my business. We were at around 15 or 16 people, and I was struggling to kind of get it to the next level. And I brought that problem to my forum. And a couple of the guys were like, hey, we're rolling out and using this system. We read this book called Traction. It's working wonders for what I'm doing. And I decided that I wanted to implement it, but I used an outside implementer, someone who knew the system well, to come in that we would pay to basically coach us through the process. And we did that in 2017, and we basically doubled in size operationally and financially every year thereafter until we sold the company.
Wow.
And I wouldn't, I won't say like, oh yeah, go implement EOS and then your company doubles in size. What it did for us was got us in the habit of having strong discipline around both understanding what the vision is for where we wanted to go and then actually doing something about it today.
Yeah.
And the whole process and system is predicated on this model that Gino developed around the 6 key components that make a company really strong when the company's great. And when you implement the system, it helps you work on those 6 key areas. And so we did that, and it worked really well. But at its core, there's no special sauce. It's not like some silver bullet thing. There are a bunch of systems out there. Honestly, the most value you can get is just implementing a system. Every entrepreneur that I meet has this like tendency to have, especially the visionaries in businesses, totally have shiny object syndrome. So they're pulling random little tips and things that they've learned from podcasts and books and stuff like that, and trying to cobble it together into a coherent system. And I tell people all the time, that's like trying to build the 6,000 piece Millennium Falcon Lego kit with no instructions and only parts from a bunch of other systems, right? It's like if I gave you 2 or 3 Disney Lego kits and a couple of these other ones that have nothing to do with Star Wars, and then I'm like, hey, make a coherent thing that looks like a Star Wars thing.
It's Frankenstein.
It's Frankenstein, right? And that's what a lot of entrepreneurs do, especially first time entrepreneurs. They see a problem, they're like, oh, how do I solve this? They listen to a podcast, they hear a thing that worked for Google or a thing that worked for like Virgin, Galactic. And they're like, oh, I'm going to do that at my company. They have no sense for how it connects to anything else. And EOS basically was like an operating system in a box, and it all is collaborative and cohesive. And that's what was valuable for us.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think that, the term operating system, I think, is so the key there. It is like a foundational way to operate the company, right? It's like you're saying, it's not just like a little snippet from a book or something where you can kind of like maybe run with that. But I've heard the feedback on EOS is that it can do wonders, but you do have to have the company to really buy in, right, as a unit.
Yeah,
on this,
that's true with anything. Whether it's EOS or any scaling up or any of the other systems that are out there.
Everyone's got to be like,
everyone's just going to be bought in. I mean, but like, this is true. If you employ someone who's not bought into the way you work, period, they should not be employed there. That's just a hard and fast rule. If they're like, if I hired people and I said, at our company, this is how we do quarterly planning, and they're like, okay, well, at my company, this is how we did it, and I'm going to just run my department completely differently. Well, now that's just like drag on the business, because you have to, I as the leadership team am developing things a certain way, and then you're taking it and reinterpreting it in your own way over there in that corner. Well, how are you going to have a conversation with everybody else at the company if you're doing it sideways, relative to the rest of us?
Right.
So it is true. It's we have one of the little terms within EOS is this concept of followed by all, right? And so one of the six key components is process.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just a basic concept that, the way that every company works is probably unique to them, and you should document to the extent that you can
Yeah.
the 20% of processes that drive 80% of your value. And then the second step is making sure that they are followed by all.
Mm,
So if we choose to hire in this way at our company, but then I got one guy over on the sales team that runs the sales group, and he unilaterally hires in his own way in his own thing. Well, guess what? Like they're almost like running their own organization. And not only
yeah.
is that less efficient, culturally, it creates less cohesion, right?
Yeah.
And so this concept of being bought in, it's like, take EOS out of the picture. If you're going to build a company, everyone's got to be doing things the same way,
Yep.
period.
Totally.
Even if that's how you come up with creative ideas.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody should be doing it the same way, because otherwise you're not building a company, you're building a set of tasks.
Yep.
And a company is a set of systems and processes that are managed by a set of people that are deemed as being the right culture fit for that organization.
Yeah.
When you build a company and you don't establish systems or processes, it's basically just a group of people doing a bunch of tasks, and that's really hard to scale.
Yeah.
And I know, because that's what I was building in the early age
Yeah.
of my business.
Yeah. Totally. I think that's great advice for any entrepreneur trying to, think about how to really set the foundational level when with
Hmm.
their company. And I know you mentioned you're the more visionary, and you like that kind of part of the job. Would you say, because I know your wife was a big part of the business as well, right?
Hmm.
Priscilla.
Hmm.
Was she the other side? Was she kind of the yin to your yang on that? Or
She's way more of a visionary, I think, than she will give herself credit for. At various times, she and Ross, who was our business partner, played this kind of pseudo integrator role within the business before we had defined that as a title within
Mm-hmm.
EOS. Once we Once we moved on to using EOS, I operated as both visionary and integrator, which is unique.
Yeah.
It's not a typical way in which we recommend people operating, but for a
Mm-hmm.
while the business was small enough that that's how we were able to do it.
Yeah.
What I would the better way to define it is that my job as integrator was to help the company keep the trains running on time. I was pretty actively involved in the day-to-day there. I like
Yeah.
that business, or that aspect of the work. She was a fantastic integrator around the people process. She was super bought in
Mm-hmm.
around that role. So she sat in the head of people seat on our accountability chart. And what she really did was created a ton of buy-in around both EOS and the cultural kind of coat of paint that we put on the business through
Yeah.
the use of EOS. And so implementing and making our core values super pervasive, and everybody really bought in on that.
Mm-hmm.
The way that processes were rolling out through the company, et cetera, like she's always been a fantastic thought partner for me in
Yeah.
that way. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and at what point did you guys meet and like start working together? When
We
was that?
met back in college,
Okay.
I mean, probably this is 2007, 2008.
Yeah.
We didn't start dating until closer to 2009, and we got married in 2012. But
Okay.
I basically started the business in earnest. I mean, I had owned Texas Humor before we got married,
Yeah.
but we were dating, obviously, and then it becoming an online store and becoming like an actual business happened right after we got married.
Gotcha.
So we got married in October, and then that later in that November was when I launched the online store
Yeah.
with the Texas Humor, or with the Ain't Texas t-shirt, and that's when it basically blew up.
Yeah. So you guys have been a team since the beginning.
Yeah, we've only ever
Basically.
really known what it's like to be in business together.
Yeah.
And not to say that it was easy out of the gates. I mean, that's not
Yeah.
the easiest thing to learn. There's no playbook for that, but we
Yeah.
got good at it, and now we really enjoy it.
Yeah. No, I love that. Cool. I could talk about the EOS stuff all day because I think
Yeah.
it's super fascinating, but I do want to, there's so much to cover here.
Yeah.
So let's kind of, let's talk a little bit about the transition, right, from Sauceda Industries to then selling to cart.com. I know that was a big moment in your life. And I think I heard you talk about kind of the hardest part of that was almost kind of the mindset shift of doing what you're doing, to being the visionary and kind of hands-on guy, to then being a part of this, even larger organization that's now kind of taken over the company, but you kind of moved, right? You did have a position at cart.com, right? Like, what was that transition like for you? And why was that maybe one of the more difficult things for you to wrap your head around, just your day-to-day after that sale?
What I would say is that selling a business is hard emotionally for anybody.
Hmm.
There are people obviously that are really happy to sell their companies because for any number of reasons, like the financial side of it, et cetera. But when you spend that much time on a problem, even when you are financially rewarded for selling it off, it can be a challenge to watch other people, work through that problem, in their own way.
Yeah.
And so I would say for me, the hardest transition was not necessarily working for somebody else or being a part of cart.com or anything else. It's really just, what's next. And it's an experience that I've had a multitude of times in my life, actually. In every instance where I've had a career shift, there's been something else that I've given up. I know
Hmm.
enough about myself to know that it's important for me to really focus. And so I've tended to want to kind of burn the boats and jump off the
Hmm.
ledge to the next thing. And so, when I left photography, that was what I did. I was trying to
Hmm.
do one foot in, one foot out as a photographer for a while. I still had the logistics company, and
Yeah.
that didn't work for either. And I
Hmm.
eventually just emailed all my clients and said, I'm out.
Yeah.
And then with Sauceda, it was kind of the same thing. It was just like at some point, I know I'm ready to move on. And
Hmm.
I had emotionally arrived at that point. I think that if I could go back and do anything again, I think I probably would have had a little bit more of a mental preparation around like what level of uh buy-in should I have or not have about where things go.
Hmm.
And I think that, a lot of people had prepared me for the idea that you have to just like you are still there while other people are running this thing. And you have to just kind of be prepared to live with that.
Hmm.
It wouldn't have been good or bad necessarily. It's just a different mindset than I think where in my head I thought there'd be a ton of agency that would have continued and all that. And
Yeah.
it's no one's fault. It's simply just my own expectations around what that was going to look like. And so
Yeah.
yeah, I think that it's more of an emotionally taxing experience than what most people would expect. That said, I had a really great experience, and I have very little to complain about
Yeah.
that would matter to anybody because I sold my business and we got a payout, and our employees ended up in a better situation financially. They were getting paid more, they had better benefits. There was a lot to celebrate around that, and
Yeah.
statistically, most companies don't survive more than 2 years, and ours lasted nearly 8.
Hmm.
And not only did it survive, it thrived and it exited to somebody who saw what we built and wanted to, pay us something for it. And so, by all accounts, it was a very successful exit in
Yeah.
that regard.
Yeah. Totally.
So, yeah.
Um, yeah. When you look back on the Sauceda Industries era of your life, what are you most proud of? And you probably touched on a few of those things there, but like,
hmm
what do you think are like is your legacy from that part of your career that you're most proud of?
We proved to a ton of people that worked for us that they are worth more than what they think or what they thought. And we all go through various stages of our lives, kind of discounting or accounting for our strengths and weaknesses. And, you know, I don't think that there's anybody who worked for me that would argue that I was the world's greatest like operational manager. Like we never claimed to be the world's best 3PL. We claimed to be the most cohesive culture and most honest communicators in the industry.
Hmm.
And the reason for that was because we knew that it was more important to be clear than it was to be exceptional in the way that most of the clients that we were working with were kind of building their businesses. They were early on; they couldn't afford these really big 3PLs and stuff, and they needed
Yeah.
flexibility, which
Yeah.
which is and flexibility is predicated on communication.
Hmm.
So for me, like I'm really proud of the number of people that we recruited to the company that came and worked for us that had no previous logistics experience and have gone on to develop. I mean, some of my managers have gone on to do some really incredible things, and people have learned, and some people have decided like 3PL and logistics is for me, and others have decided it's
Yeah.
not. But I'm really proud of what I think. You know, we used to make people stand up and speak to the entire company. And I wanted, in a lot of ways, the way that Miss Angelo used the theater program to teach us about life, we we did a lot of things at our business that enabled people to think more about what their own situations were. There's a
Mm-hmm.
guy named Omar that worked for us that we did a loan program. It was, I mean, this cost us nothing because it was a loan. Like we weren't just giving away money, but
Yeah.
Omar tells us all the time that like the money that we loaned him, he's a veteran, so he was able to put very little down on a house to buy a
Mm-hmm.
house, but he had to put something down, and we loaned him the
Mm-hmm.
money to do that. And it was a couple $1,000, and he loaned that money, or we loaned him that money, and he bought a house. And subsequently, he was able to sell that house and buy another house, another house. And I talked to him recently. He lives in Florida now, and he told me, he was like, y'all believed in me at times when I wasn't really believing in myself. And I've got this beautiful family, and I've got, a generational wealth that I'm creating in this home that I was able to build and buy off of this small thing that you did that really didn't cost
Yeah.
you anything, other than the effort and time that it took to just put into thinking through how to do it.
Yeah.
And those stories, of which there are a ton, are really, really impactful to me. The number of really deep friendships that developed, like I'm very anti like we are a family talk within the corporate environment, but I love when you can develop great friendships that continue past.
Mm-hmm.
I believe in separating the two, and that you can be really good friends and close with people while also being very honest and holding people accountable. And I
Yeah.
think that we did that well. Like I
Yeah.
think that we built an organization that everybody knew where they stood, and people were hired and fired. And shoot, there's an employee that we fired that, it was not working out at the company. And here, all these years later, we still do a little Christmas party every year. And he came to the Christmas party this year. He actually has come for the last couple of years,
Yeah.
and he was fired. Right. And
Yeah.
I've had multiple people who've told me, like, you firing me was the best thing that ever happened, because I was not hitting the bar, and it made me go figure myself out elsewhere.
Yeah.
Right. And so all of that makes me really proud for the people that work for us. And then I'd say the last thing for me more personally is just, it gave me a platform to really put out in the world what I believe as an entrepreneur, and lead by example around how to build really great workplaces for
Mm-hmm.
people who are bootstrapped.
Yeah.
And excuse me, I hear all the time from old, clients of ours that want to mimic things that we did at our business. These two great co-CEOs, Jacqueline and Leah from Pepper, hit me up all the time, and they're like, "We still remember your core values."
Hmm.
So the idea that like a client that worked for us,
Mm-hmm.
and we haven't worked with in a long time, but they can still, off the top of their head, tell me what the Sauceda core values are, like that's
Yeah.
huge.
Yeah.
And they call me all the time for advice on how to implement and do stuff at their business, and I love that
Yeah.
they saw our house as a shining house on the hill
Yep.
culturally. I want everyone to get the most. Like, if I had to sum up everything about my career, and the byline that you were saying is like kind of all over the place, like when I hear the byline and people describe it and they're like, "Man, you've done a lot of stuff. Like, how, what drove you?" The thing that drove me is this idea that we have a limited number of laps around the sun, and a desire to maximize my happiness on as many of those laps as possible. And that
Mm-hmm.
means changing to and chasing whatever it is that I'm interested in, and being super, super pleased about that.
Yeah.
And I want to enable more people in the world to do that in whatever way that is, whether that's as an employee at a really great company who is honest about them and creates a culture in which they can be honest about what they need from the company,
Mm-hmm.
and vice versa for entrepreneurs to have the flexibility to not just be locked into a business that they, like me, accidentally founded, and then suddenly feel like they're stuck, right? Like I want to give
Mm-hmm.
them unlimited flexibility and create the space that I didn't have when I was building Sauceda, right? And
Yeah.
so to me, that's the legacy, is that you can literally do anything that you want if you just put a little mind and focus and some process around it.
Yeah.
That's what I hope the legacy is. We taught that to our employees, and I think that the reputation and the things that we accomplished at our business have been an example for companies to model themselves after now.
Yeah, that's amazing, and I love the fact that so much of that investment you made in people, during the Sauceda Industries era is still living on, and like you're saying, you're feeling the impact of that energy and that empathy you put in. So so many years ago is still coming back and rewarding you and kind of paying off and showing you that it was in fact worth the time and energy back
I
then. And
there's a great 3PL down in San Marcos that the CEO and I bumped into each other at a conference last year. I'd never met him before, and a mutual friend introduced us, and he was like, "Wait, are you the Jay B Sauceda, like from Sauceda Industries? And I was like, yeah, why? And he gave me this like huge hug. He's like, dude, I have like 6 of your employees working for me, and they are the best
Oh
people that
my
we
gosh,
have at
that's
our
awesome.
company, and
Yeah.
that was just such a resonant moment for me to know,
Yeah.
like, wow, it's incredible that the way that they operate is something that they've carried forward into what they're doing. And they
Yeah.
reference their experiences, both for good and bad. It's not that like everything we did was perfect.
Yeah.
They're also taking those lessons the things that we didn't do well and said, okay, now I'm at this new company. How am I going to improve upon that? Right.
Yeah.
And that makes me happy too. It's not just about celebrating the wins. It's
Right.
also about learning from your losses.
Yeah. No, 100%. Okay. So, after cart.com, right? I know you and Priscilla both eventually stopped working kind of after that transition, and you had this moment where
well, I was fired, but
okay.
they liked her, so they kept her around.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
so,
She stayed on a little bit
she
longer.
stayed on for a little bit longer, another 4 or 5 months. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And she was doing is more HR stuff.
She was on the people side.
People
So
side?
she reported to the chief people officer.
Yeah. They were trying to soak up all that culture stuff you guys built
100%.
there.
Yeah.
But then eventually you guys took this great family trip, right? And was that kind of after she had left?
Yeah, we knew that we wanted to do it. We started planning it in January, right after I was fired. I had a lot more free time on my hands, and so I sat down and thought through an itinerary and came up with basically a 2.5 month long road trip across the United States. And the great thing about logistics is it's kind of an always on business, right? It's sort of like, do you want to go mine for gold, or do you want to sell the shovels and the picks, right? And so in our case, like, logistics is very much shovels and pickaxes, but the flip side is that you're always on, and specifically during the holiday season. And so, I wouldn't say that regret's kind of a strong word. I use it sometimes and not others, but I wish that I'd established some better boundaries for myself, specifically around the holiday season, because Christmas is just such a special time, especially when you have children. And I was busy a lot. I mean, we were just shipping for all of our clients, and so it was really tough. And so after we sold and we knew that we were going to have some resources and time, I said, I want to give some time back to my kids. And so we went and spent 2.5 months on the road with them, traveling all across the country. And that was easily one of the most impactful investments that we made in our family after all of that happened.
Yeah, I can imagine that was a pretty big cathartic release to have this like uninterrupted time where you guys are just out in nature. Because I've only been to a couple of national parks, and really super recently in my life had I ever seen a national park, and I was just blown away. Like, how have I not done this before? And now I do want to go to see all of them.
We went to 15. 15.
Wow.
Yeah, we basically traveled like the smile of America, right? So sort of up the coast on the east and the west, and down I-10 all the way across. So we saw a lot. But my thing is that you don't have to go to a national park, right? This was really about getting on the road and doing something different, and recognizing it would have been just as easy for us to stay in Austin and like go to the pool every week or whatever. But we wanted for both us and our children to make some, new kind of neuron connections in our brains and get out of the habits and do something that was a little bit hard, but really enjoyable. And so, it was not easy traveling around for that long with everything that we had. I mean, we had our dogs with us, so everything about this was like not an easy trip.
Logistically, it
was a challenge, But I mean, we traveled over 10,000 miles and 15 national parks. I mean, it was a really unbelievable experience. And and now, I mean, it also taught me a lot about my kids and what they like. There were aspects about that whole thing that they really enjoyed, things that they didn't as well. But we all, at the very end of the trip, I cut together this video that just like strings together a bunch of the kind of core memories from the whole thing, against the song Clair de Lune, the piano piece. And we can't, as a family, watch it without getting a huge lump in our throat, And it was barely a year ago that we did this. And we watch it and we just kind of wish like we had that time together all the time. But what it has done is made us very heavily focused on devoting time and energy to the things that maximize happiness. And so right before I was fired, I wasn't happy. There were some, things I was just trying to think through what I wanted to do next. And there were a lot of, kind of just personal things I was working through. And I sat down, actually my EO forum, we decided to go through a practice of like, what would our life by design look like? Right. And
Mm-hmm.
so for 6 months, 7 months, we were all going to present that to one another in the EO forum. So I came home that December of 2022, and I told my wife, I was like, hey, I need to do this for my forum. It's in like a week. And so I went and took a shower. I came out and sat on the couch, and we just kind of like word vomited about how we were feeling, where we wanted our life to take us. And a lot of the way that we kind of structured it was leveraging EOS. I wasn't an implementer at the time, but
Mm-hmm.
we were leveraging the same tools that we had used for the business to take this big kind of where are we going in 10 years and so
Yeah.
on. And one of the outputs of that was the concept of going on this trip. Like that, like,
Mm.
reinvesting time was like an important piece.
Yeah.
But we also established just some other frameworks for ourselves around like what is kind of considered gravy at the company, like what, or for
Mm.
ourselves, like how much do we need to live on?
Mm-hmm.
And then anything above that, what is gravy?
Yeah.
And the idea is that we as a family needed to know what the difference is between like our absolutes to kind of just be happy,
Mm-hmm.
and then what are the nice to haves, right? And so happy for us in the sort of definition was that we can afford our house, our cars. Um, we're able to go on like a date night a couple of times a month and go somewhere nice and not like
Mm-hmm.
think about it, right?
Yeah.
We can hire some help here or there to with a couple of things like maybe the laundry or someone cleaning the house
Yeah.
occasionally, and take a trip or two a year. Everything else, like a plane or a boat or like these big extravagant vacations, et cetera, all of that was nice to have.
Yeah.
And the thinking around this, and we arrived at a number. The number was really clear. It was like, all right, this much per year, period. And then we basically established sort of a framework for ourselves, that was predicated on flexibility. We are willing to trade flexibility. For example, let's say like I got offered a job to go work somewhere for $1 million a year, but I have to be on the road 3/4 of the year and I'm not going to see my kids. Would I
Mm-hmm.
do that? Maybe for a year, but that's going to really, really negatively impact our family happiness. And
Yeah.
we've already established that we don't need anything more than this number over here to be happy. So we as a couple are going to have a conversation about it
Yeah.
and whether or not we're going to take that on versus me just committing to it because it's more money, period, end of story,
Right.
right?
Now you have like a baseline to kind of measure it
Yeah, it's
against.
like, how
And
are we doing relative to this? And what do we have to give up or do more of or less of, right?
yeah.
And so that really set us up in a big way to kind of think through what the next phase of life was going to look like and
Yeah.
where we needed to be, again, financially, et cetera, and what we would be willing to give up at any given time in exchange for kind of retreating to this happiness level, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, good example is like this year, I bought a plane. They're not cheap. I financed part of it
Yeah.
and I can afford it. I'm not losing sleep over it. If one of us decided to not stop, like not work any longer, that would be fine. I don't know that we would keep it around forever, if that was the case. If we really felt like one of us not working was where we needed to be for any number of reasons, that's a nice to have. I love
Yeah.
having it. I can also rent one if I need one,
Yeah.
right? But we're in a position today where we're above it, above our like level. We can afford this thing. It's nice to have.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not going to lose sleep over the idea that if I ever have to get rid of it, I have to.
Right.
Because we had a conversation. We went offsite. Priscilla and I thought about what our game plan is. And we always just look back at it.
Yeah.
And so as I got fired and then as she considered leaving the business, we use that framework to kind of always just go back and check our notes and say, how are we doing relative to these goals?
Yeah.
Right. And so going back to the statement I made at the beginning, it's like, there are some people who just live this way. Like our old head of finance, Matt Newey, him and his wife, we made fun of him and he would joke around, like they live in spreadsheets. Like they're just both super organized people.
Yeah.
They're awesome at that. Like that, I love that about him.
Yeah.
That is not Priscilla and I. We don't operate that way as individuals. And so we basically used EOS in lieu of being wired that way
Yeah.
to kind of create that structure and kind of like give us this barometer for what we are willing to do more or less of. And so it's funny
I
because,
love that.
even her bosses that she works for now, I ran into them this week and they gave her, some little financial incentives and stuff, and they said, but we know she's not motivated by money, and she is totally like that. I am absolutely motivated by money, but she is not
Yeah.
motivated by money, and that's a
Yeah.
beautiful thing, right? And so it's a it's a very freeing kind of concept, and I think the last thing I would say on this is that right around when I got fired, I had a conversation with an old client of mine, this woman, Stephanie Parker. She's a Harvard Business School grad, really sharp lady. And she had been like our operations manager at director of operations at Tecovas Boots when we were working with them.
Mm-hmm.
And she had just recently left Google last year, and we met up to grab some coffee and just kind of talk about some stuff. And she mentioned that she had worked for this professor Christensen, I think it was his last name. He's a pretty famous professor at Harvard. And he basically gave this advice to these students and said, look, like everybody in this room is going to be at the upper echelon of income spectrum. Like you're all Harvard Business School grads. It's just like, this is the way it's going to work. But I'm going to give you a cautionary tale, which is like, you're going to be given more and more opportunities to grow your income over the years. And you should always build your lifestyle around whatever 50% of that income is. Just because you're making $1 million a year doesn't mean you should build your life around that income, because you're going to paint yourself into a corner. You're going to be in a situation where you have built a lifestyle around this job that pays you $1 million, of which there are statistically very few of. And so when something goes wrong in that role, where else are you going to go? If you want to wait tables, you can wait tables anywhere. There's 1 billion restaurants, but there are only so many jobs paying you that much money.
Right.
So when you build your lifestyle around your financial, like the most peak level of your financial situation, it's going to make it very difficult for you to make decisions around happiness or flexibility, et cetera. And so that's in effect basically what we were kind of trying to do with this EOS concept for our family life, and the framework and the sort of minimum levels that we established for ourselves. We wanted to know, like, let's make this corner that we paint ourselves into as big as possible, so we have as much flexibility. And that's really what that number was about.
Yeah, I love that. And it goes to what you're saying, like what you did really well was just, we communicated like, so much. We tried to over communicate, and that was kind of our strength. And it seems like you're bringing that now to your family's kind of foundation and values. Is like, let's communicate, let's get it on the table, let's put it all out there.
Yeah,
let's be really clear and communicate it out loud to each other, so there's no ambiguity if things go awry. Like, where do we sit? And I love that.
Uncommunicated expectations are simply premeditated resentment. Period. End of story. And so, like at a company, when a leader or founder has an idea for where they want to go and they never communicate it, and then no one is living up to their expectations, and they're not like hitting their goals or moving the ball forward, well, guess what? It's because you didn't communicate what the hell it is that you want to do with this business. That is an uncommunicated expectation.
Yeah.
If in a family, environment, the husband and wife are not communicating about what they want to see out of life, they're working on they're working on two different wavelengths.
Yeah.
That's not unfair for people to have different expectations about what they want to do long term.
Yeah.
But it's not reasonable to not sit down and have a conversation about them.
Yeah.
Right. And so EOS, what it taught us as a company, again, wasn't some big silver bullet. It got us in the habit of getting out of the damn business and working on it instead of in it.
Yeah.
And when you're on the business and you're not in the problems of the day to day, and you're kind of asking yourselves, like, where do I want to go? What do I want out of this? It creates a more clarity around the plan, right?
Yeah.
And families generally don't do this, right? Husbands and wives, whatever, like spouses, significant others, don't think, let's take a break and go off site and ask ourselves, what do we want out of the next year or two?
Yeah.
I was thankful that my forum kind of triggered me into doing this. And then it became this thing that now I've actually done public talks on.
Yeah.
But it's totally true. It's like, you got to have those offsites. You got to go talk about where do we want to go.
Yeah.
And have that conversation, it's like we do it in companies, and great companies do it well.
Yeah.
And they do it regularly, and it's part of the fabric of their business. And great families are the same way if you do it. It's not as prevalent of a concept, but like every company should be treated, or every family is really a business in a way. You need a certain amount of ins to pay for the outs, and you got to have more ins than outs, right? And like, that's the basis of a family.
Yeah.
That's no different than a business.
Totally.
It's the same exact thing as a business. So every family needs a business plan. Doesn't need to be complex, but you got to have a plan, and you should talk about it.
Yeah. No, I think honestly, I'm like so inspired to go home and do this with my wife because we've been talking about a lot more just naturally because now we are at the point where I'm doing a little more creative project, right? We don't have the same income we used to have coming in the door as
Hmm.
we used to. And so now we're like trying to figure out, okay, what is our minimum threshold we can get by on? And so we're having more of the conversations. But to your point earlier, it's like a little Frankenstein conversations. It's like, we talk about for like 2 minutes on one night we're doing laundry.
Yeah.
And then it's like a little bit over here and then a little bit over there. But we haven't really had like a full sit down like let's just really get every angle on paper and just kind of try to communicate it. And I think that is, you do it in a business and
Hmm.
good businesses do it effectively, like you're saying.
Well, and the challenge with doing it kind of in the hallway, like the way you described, is that it's hard to enter the danger zone, right? Like,
Mhm.
I'm going to just make something up, but it's like, let's pretend in this case, it's like you're doing this thing that's more creative over here, and she's got like a shorter timeline that she wants you to be doing it until it makes sense, and you're like, I'm gonna, it'll break through at some point,
Yeah.
whatever, right?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know what that is,
Yeah.
but like I mean, that's been true with me in my business. I mean, even building my EOS practice from scratch, Priscilla, I like we weren't totally communicative about what that was going to look like initially. And I had an idea in my head about when I was going to devote the time and energy to going out and doing the business development and really pushing it. And she
Mhm.
wasn't clear. And it didn't create any challenges, but it certainly was something that when she was curious about where my head was and then brought it up to me. And in the hallway, it's hard to really be able to
Yeah.
share that and get deep on it. Right. And my sense of this is that like it's easier to be passive aggressive by mistake in the hallway
Mhm.
versus having a hey, we're all here for the same reason, which is to build some sort of thing together that's better and bigger and is good,
Yeah.
and this is why we're in this room, so let's go work out the problems and work out the kinks.
Yeah.
When you just do it in the hallway, it's so easy to kind of like accidentally step on each other or maybe
Yep.
not be respectful of one another's sort of goals and intents.
Mhm.
And the offsite sort of exercise is intended to be predicated on like we're here to solve a big problem.
Yeah.
We're gonna hit some bumps along the way, but by the time we leave this room, we're gonna be aligned on what it's gonna take to get there, or make adjustments on the strategy accordingly.
Mhm.
And it's just hard to do that over dinner.
Yeah,
I mean,
totally.
Priscilla was like showing me a plan that she had for how to update my daughter's watch to make it like useful for her children and for a
Mhm.
child. And I was in the middle of a video game, and like it was just like a middle of the like
Yeah.
day conversation. And I mean, I've gotten better about saying like, can we engage on this when I'm like actually able to engage with you,
Yeah.
And she literally, and this was great. She like got on her computer and she just emailed me the thing. She's like, hey, will you just take a look at this whenever you get a chance? Right.
Yeah.
It's just being respectful of
Yeah.
everybody's time and stuff. And I think those are all little traits that I learned from EOS, but have
Yeah.
actually totally been valuable and worthwhile in my
Yeah,
marriage.
that's great feedback. I love to hear that. Man, I could pull that thread a lot longer as well.
Yeah.
I know I've taken up a lot of your time already. So last question, I
Yeah.
got to get to Texas Country Reporter, right? Because
Yeah.
this feels like a job created for JB Sauceda in so many different ways, and I know there's a lot of history with this job, right?
Yeah.
It's something that's been going on for 50 plus years. But the thing I wanted to ask you is that I think what's maybe unique about this is that you've done so much ground building, like starting companies from the ground up, starting communities
Mhm.
from the ground up. This role, you're going into something that has a lot of legacy and an audience already built in, maybe likely an audience you've never really reached, you've spoken to directly in the way that you do with Texas Country Reporter. Was it a little intimidating going into this big kind of historical role? It, not with a blank slate like you're used to, like being able to kind of go
Yeah.
in there
I
and
mean,
do things the way you want. But now you're going into a role that's already kind of fully baked in terms of what it is and its identity, and you have to keep it going versus like getting to start over, starting something on your own from scratch. Does that even make sense? That question? I
yeah,
don't
no,
know.
totally. I was really honest and very forward with the management team when I was interviewing for this. I said, look, like I have no doubt that there are probably better people for TV than me that you're interviewing, who probably do TV all the time. And I'm kind of I've had my foot in it sort of in a few ways.
Mm-hmm.
But I said I will the one hill I will die on is that I have no question in my mind that I'm the best manager to come in and manage this change management exercise that the organization is about to go through.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason that I felt that way was like I've managed large teams. I mean, at our peak, we had 150 employees at Sauceda. And then, I've also been on the receiving end of my company being ingested by a larger
Mm-hmm.
organization, right? So I've kind of just I'm very much a middle child, and so I understood very firmly what that was going to look like.
Yeah.
It was certainly daunting. I mean, look, Texas Country Reporter's been on TV for 52 years. We're halfway through the 53rd season, and it's a great show about all of the beauty of both the people and the culture around Texas.
Mm-hmm.
And that audience, statistically, tends to be older, kind of in their 40s, 50s, and 60s. And so as a result, I knew, I mean, there are plenty of things that I don't like changing, that over time it would be a challenge to bring an audience who is very much, used to things looking a certain way on board with any amount of change. And so, I didn't look at it as like a massively overwhelming or intimidating, uh, problem, but intimidated is probably a strong word. I was nervous knowing that I was going to I was very confident that I was going to take full well in to account all of the history and the legacy of the show. And I was going to be respectful of that. And the only, nervous kind of component that I had was, am I going to be making the right calls for the things that I am going to change? Am I going to make the right calls?
Yeah.
And I think that we've managed it well, and we're up in the ratings.
I mean, the show's incredible. Yeah, I was wondering how the reception has been.
It's been fantastic. I mean, look, like there are always going to be people who don't like change, and there've been a handful of those people. But I mean, it's not even close. It's like overwhelmingly, the response has been fantastic. And we invested. I mean, Texas Monthly bought the show. We spent like $60,000 on new equipment, and we're hiring some new people. Like they're investing in the show. That we're in it for the long haul. This is gonna be a show that I mean, I'm older than what the original host was when he started. So I don't know that I'll last 50 years. I would love that. If I had the age to go that far, I will. But this thing is going to be around for a long time, and we're taking it, and we want to be respectful and honor the legacy that it's had, and be super cognizant and aware of the fact that the media landscape has changed dramatically, and the way in which we deliver the show has to evolve for it to continue to have the prevalence and kind of credibility that it's always had.
All right, if it wasn't obvious, I could have talked to JB all day. He left me fired up in a lot of ways. In fact, right after we finished recording, my wife and I sat down and did a similar exercise he did with his wife, mapping out our family's core values, our non-negotiables, and a 10-year vision. It was eye-opening, and honestly, I can't recommend it enough. Now, my resume might not look like JB's by the time I hit 40, but this conversation was a great reminder that if you're intentional about how you structure your life, you're never locked into a predetermined path. And if you want to see JB out there telling the stories of other extraordinary Texans, tune in to Texas Country Reporter every Sunday at 10:30 a.m. on KView, or go to texasmonthly.com. Until next time, I'm Pat Killoran, and this is Lone Startup.